Are you ready to unlock the power of scroll-based animation sequencing on your website? In this tutorial, I'll show you how to use Framer Motion's animate and use scroll hooks to create impeccable and exquisite animation sequences triggered by your user scrolling. Get ready to unlock new powers to take your website to the next level. Hello, I'm Thomas Musial, CEO of Focus Flow Software, and I'm here to teach you how to make your website stand out with exquisite animations. Let's get to it. Alright, to start, we're going to have to import the animate hook from Framer Motion. This is going to allow us to start animations one after another, and we can do some really cool sequencing with this hook. And then we're going to need a component to animate. So right now we have two image text boxes, which we made last video, so you can check those out if you want to learn how to make this layout. And now we're going to have to define the initial states that we want for the animations, and we do that by starting in the CSS. I'm using Tailwind CSS, but you can use regular CSS if you want. So for the image, we're going to go opacity 0, and instead of a regular H2 tag, we're going to make a new component called sliding text. Now this is what's going to trigger the animations to start when the sliding is complete, and we can use the regular text title that's passed in from here. This is going to be very important to trigger the animations. And then for the P tag, we can add opacity 0 and translate it down in the Y direction. And for the button, we can add some horizontal translation, depending on if it's the reverse or not, with this code right here. Also recognize that each element here, we have a custom ID with each element so that we can identify the element when it's time to animate it. Now, once we want to animate it, we can use this handle animation function that we're going to make to define the animations. So first we're going to have to use that element. So we go, first let's get the image. So we can do this. Document get element by ID. We can do the $. We can get its unique ID. And then if image exists, we can use the animate function. So we use await animate. You don't really have to worry about what await does. All it does for our purposes, it will make every animation we put go one and after another. So then the await animate function takes two objects, the element we want to animate, and then the styles. So for this one, we just want to go opacity 1, and then we define the transition for the ease, and we just go ease in, out. Now we're going to do that for the other elements, so we're going to get the paragraph here, and the button, and then for the button, we're going to do this animation right here, bring the opacity to 1 and X to 0, and for the paragraph, we're going to bring the opacity to 1 and the Y to 0. Now we're going to have to define when do we want handle animation to actually start. And for that, we're going to need a use effect. And this use effect is going to listen for when slide complete is true. So if slide complete is true, we're going to start our handle animation function. And we're going to add slide complete as a dependency, which means every time slide complete changes, this code's going to run. But how do we actually decide when slide complete is true? This sliding text component is going to handle that. So let's get into that part. Now we're making the component that makes these two headers slide in and trigger the animations. To do that, we're using three hooks from Framer Motion called use scroll, use transform, and use motion event. And I'll explain each one when we get to them. Now the props for this component are passed in from our other component for our purposes, but it doesn't have to be that way. So we have the text, which is the image text box's title, the set slide complete function, which is going to tell our image text box when the sliding is complete and to trigger the animations. And if the reverse variant is true, it's just going to slide in from a different direction. Now, to start, we have the target ref. It's another use ref hook that we use in the H2 tag so that we can detect where the H2 tag is relative to the screen. And we have a local slide complete so that we can detect when the sliding is complete on this component itself. And then we have a regular motion H2 tag with some styling. Now we're gonna define the first hook that we need, which is the useScroll, so that we can tell how far we've scrolled. So we're gonna do const scroll y progress equals useScroll, and then we have to pass in two parameters, which is the target ref, which is the target ref right here. So we're referencing this tag, and the offset. Now we have it set to end start, and this means the animation is going to start when the bottom of the h2 tag is at the start of the screen. So when the bottom gets to the top, it's going to start, and when the bottom of the element gets to the top of the screen, the scrolling will be considered complete. This will make a lot more sense once we get it in action, and I'll explain it more in depth. Now that we can keep track of our scrolling, we can define how we're going to get the header to slide in, and we can do that with the useTransform hook. And this takes in three parameters. It takes in the scroll y progress, and then two arrays for the values. So the first one, 0 and 0.6, this means that our animations are going to occur from 0% of the element being scrolled in to 60% of the full scrolling. So it's only going to be for 60% of the element. And then our second one is going to be our actual values. So since we want it to scroll in, it has to be offset first. So if it's not the reverse variant, it's going to slide in from 350 units to the right. Otherwise, it's going to be 350 units to the left. And then as the element slides in, it's going to finish at 0. So when it's 0% slid through, it's going to be 350 to the left or right. And once we get to 60% of the element, it's going to be at 0, which is its original position. We can also add a cool fading in effect by doing the same thing with the opacity. And now we're going to have to actually detect when does this value hit 0. So to do that, we can use the last hook called useMotionValueEvent. So we can do boom, useMotionValueEvent. This takes in three parameters. The value that we're tracing, and that's the x value. And this function happens every time the value changes, and then we're going to have a callback function to what we want to do every time the x value changes. And we're going to need the latest value. And for that, we have a simple if statement that if it equals 0, so once it gets to 0 in its original position, we set local slide complete, meaning this component knows that the slide is complete, and then we'll let the image text box know that the sliding is complete as well, and we'll trigger the animations. Now we're going to quickly make a correction. This is supposed to be end, because this is supposed to start when the bottom of the element is at the bottom of the screen. But now we're going to apply these two styles to our h2 tag, and we'll see the sliding happen. So we're going to make a style equals x and the opacity, we just pass them in. And now we're going to see our headers slide in. So we start sliding down, and now you can see the opacity and x value are starting to increase as we scroll. And then once it hits 0, we're going to have our elements slide in, because we have set slide complete to true. So it let the image text box know that the elements are visible. And then it started the handle animation sequence we were talking about earlier. And then we keep sliding down. For the reverse variant, we're going to see it sliding from the other direction, right there. So you can see the opacity in x changing based off the progress of scrolling in the y. And every time that value changes, the useMotionValueEvent occurs, and it checks if it equals 0. And once it does equal 0, you can see the sliding happens. And it's very interactive, and it's a good way to keep your users on your screen, and another cool way to animate your objects. Now that we have the sliding working, I want to go over the core concept of this video one more time, which is using the scroll progress in the y direction to determine how we're going to add styling to our elements. So we have the target of the scroll y progress, and we use the useTransform, and we're only going to use the values when the element is 0% scrolled through to 60% scrolled through. And as it goes from 0% to 60% scrolled through, it will start at an offset of 350 in the x direction. And by the time the element gets to 60% to the top of the screen, it will get to 0. And these animations will start when the bottom of the element is at the bottom of the screen, signified by end, and then end start. The element will be fully animated into its final animation states with x0 and opacity 1 by the time the bottom of the element is at the top of the screen, or in our case, 60% to the top of the screen. So as you can see, it's at opacity 0 and translated 350 in the x direction because it's all the way down here. We're not scrolled through at all. But now, as it's getting closer to the top of the screen, which is 60%, you can see the values in the x are getting smaller and the opacity is getting more. And then we can use the useMotionValue event to track when it hits the 0 offset for it to appear, and boom, that's how it works. Another concept I want to explain is how you can pass data through multiple components. So here I have this graph or illustration to demonstrate 3 files and how they can interact with each other. We have our data file, the image text box, and our sliding text component. So you can pass in data from the data file here. It goes here. And then when you want another prop, you can pass it in to the sliding text. And then you can do all your calculations here. And when you also pass in your set animation complete function in here, once it does all its calculations and the x offset equals 0, it can send the data back to your main component to trigger animations. So you can see that in here we have our animation complete or slide complete function here. And when it is set to true, we can trigger the animations. But the logic for that to happen can be a lot. So instead of writing it all out in this file, we can write it in a new component, which is the sliding text. So we can have all the logic done in here, so that back in this component it looks nice and simple. And also this sliding text can be used in other parts of your project. This is a really good way to keep your code maintainable, easy to read, and scalable for big projects. So that's how you can use the scroll progress to do some pretty cool animations, and how you can sequence animations on your websites. There's a lot of possibilities that you can do with this, endless combinations. You just have to get creative and continue experimenting. Stay tuned for future videos because I'm going to do more advanced and complex animations that look even cooler than this that you're not going to want to miss out on. You can go to FocusFlowSoftware.com to see some of my best animations and learn something new. In the meantime, keep working hard at your craft, and I'll see you next time.